6 people disappear every year on the Appalachian Trail. Some are found miles away, in terrain they couldn't possibly have crossed. Others are never found at all. In 2013, an experienced hiker named Geraldine Largay stepped 2 feet off the trail to use the bathroom. She was found 2 years later, just 2 miles from where she disappeared. Her journal showed she survived for 26 days. 26 days, 2 miles from the trail, and rescue teams walked past her location multiple times. How is that possible? What I discovered in these mountains changed everything we thought we knew about these disappearances. And the answer is in the rocks themselves. Part 1. The Missing. Sarah Chen had studied the cases for 3 years before she decided to hike the Appalachian Trail herself. As a geophysicist with a minor in forensic psychology, she became obsessed with what investigator David Paulides called Missing 411, the inexplicable pattern of disappearances in wilderness areas across North America. But nowhere was the pattern more pronounced than in the ancient Appalachian Mountains. The statistics haunted her, an average of 6 people vanishing each year from the Appalachian Trail alone. Some found miles away in impossible terrain, others, like 6-year-old Dennis Martin, disappearing in 1969 behind a bush during a game of hide-and-seek, never seen again despite a search involving 1,400 volunteers combing 56 square miles. Or Geraldine Largay, who in 2013 stepped off the trail to use the bathroom in Maine and got lost. Her remains found 2 years later just 2 miles from the trail, her journal recording 26 days of survival before exposure claimed her. But it was the cases that made no sense that drew Sarah deeper. People found in areas already searched, experienced hikers disoriented in familiar territory, the complete absence of footprints or disturbed vegetation, and the distances, victims discovered in locations that would have required crossing impassable ridges or dense forest that showed no signs of passage. Standing at the trailhead in the Great Smoky Mountains on an October morning, Sarah adjusted her GPS beacon and satellite phone. She demapped the clusters where disappearances occurred most frequently, parts of North Georgia, western North Carolina, and particularly here in the Smokies. She had her hypothesis. Now she needed proof. Part 2. The Anomaly. 3 days into her hike, Sarah reached the area where Melton had vanished in 1981. The 58-year-old had been an experienced hiker, familiar with the Deep Creek Trail. She simply walked over a hill ahead of her companions and was never seen again. 150 rescuers and 9 K9 units found nothing. Sarah pulled out her magnetometer, an instrument typically used to detect variations in Earth's magnetic field, often employed in archaeological surveys and mineral exploration. She brought it based on her research into the Appalachian geology. The Appalachian Mountains were among the oldest on Earth, formed over 480 million years ago through a series of tectonic collisions. The Brunswick Magnetic Anomaly ran through this region, a geological feature snaking from Alabama through Georgia to North Carolina, its outer banks, marking where ancient tectonic plates had sutured together. The magnetic intensity variations caused by different rock types and fault structures created one of the most magnetically complex regions in North America. But what Sarah was detecting made her breath catch. The readings were erratic, far beyond normal geological variation. The needles swung wildly, then stabilized at readings that shouldn't exist. She checked her equipment 3 times. No malfunction. She pulled up her maps showing the documented disappearance locations and overlaid them with geological survey data on magnetic anomalies. The correlation was undeniable. Every cluster of missing persons cases aligned perfectly with areas of extreme magnetic field variation. Part 3. The Disorientation. Sarah's hands trembled as she made notes. Birds and sea turtles used Earth's magnetic field for navigation. Studies had shown that magnetic anomalies could disrupt these geomagnetic cues, causing disorientation and altered migratory routes. But could they affect humans? She knew the human brain contained magnetite crystals, tiny particles that some researchers believed might make humans subtly sensitive to magnetic fields. Most people wouldn't consciously notice. But what if the variations here were strong enough to affect the brain, spatial processing? The hippocampus, responsible for navigation and memory. The vestibular system that controlled balance and spatial orientation. The physical exhaustion from hiking would make hikers more vulnerable. Days of exertion, dehydration, and the body's stress response could amplify any neurological effects. Combined with the dense forest canopy blocking familiar visual landmarks, Hikers could become profoundly disoriented even on marked trails they walked hours before. Sarah thought of Geraldine Largay as journal entries. She'd been trying to find her way back. She sent text messages that never went through due to poor cell service. For 26 days, she'd been within 2 miles of the trail, but couldn't find it. Rescue teams had searched that area repeatedly. How could an experienced hiker, not far from a well-marked trail, become so utterly lost? Unless something had fundamentally disrupted her sense of direction. Part 4. The pattern. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She reviewed the cases again by flashlight. The boy who vanished behind a bush, Dennis Martin. The search area was saturated with volunteers within hours, yet found nothing. As if he simply ceased to exist in that spot. No scent trail for the dogs to follow. The unidentified woman found in 2000 in a lake along the trail. In the water for about a month, but no one had claimed her. No identification. How does someone hike into one of America's most traveled trails and disappear so completely that no one even reports them missing? The clusters in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. 5 cold cases of people who vanished without trace. Thelma, Polly, Melton. The mysterious call she made the day before her disappearance. To whom? About what? She walked over a hill. Just over a hill. Sarah understood why some theorized about criminals, about Park Service cover-ups, even about stranger things. Because the simplest explanation, that people got lost and died from exposure, didn't fit the evidence. Bodies should have been found. There should have been traces, disturbed earth, broken branches, fabric caught on thorns. Search and rescue teams included experienced trackers and highly trained dogs. The Appalachian Trail, despite its remoteness, was one of the most heavily traveled hiking routes in America. Yet people vanished as if they stepped through an invisible door. Part 5. The realization. On her 4th day, Sarah experienced it herself. She was following the marked trail, GPS signal strong, visibility good. She just checked her position 5 minutes earlier. But when she looked up from adjusting her pack strap, nothing looked familiar. The trail markers were gone. Her rational mind insisted she simply lost the trail, taken a wrong turn. But her GPS showed her standing directly on the mapped trail route. She looked around carefully. The forest appeared different. The trees seemed denser, the undergrowth thicker. The quality of light had changed, though the sun's position suggested only minutes had passed. She felt a wave of disorientation so profound it nearly brought her to her knees. The magnetometer in her hand was showing readings that spiked far beyond anything she recorded. The needle swung in slow arcs, as if the magnetic north itself was moving. Sarah's heart pounded. She recognized the symptoms. Spatial disorientation, the sensation that the ground was tilting though she knew it was level, an almost overwhelming urge to walk in a direction that felt right, though she couldn't rationally justify it. She forced herself to stand still. To breathe, she pulled out her emergency whistle and blew 3 sharp blasts, the universal signal for distress. Then she sat down, despite every instinct screaming at her to move, to find the trail, to get out. This was how they got lost. This sensation, this overwhelming conviction that they knew which way to go, combined with the complete inability to recognize their actual location. Hikers would follow this false sense of direction, walking confidently away from trails, from roads, from help. By the time the effect wore off, if it wore off, they'd be miles from where they should be, with no idea how they'd gotten there. Part 6. The escape. Sarah stayed put for 3 hours, fighting the disorientation. She took readings every 15 minutes, documenting the magnetic field variations. The intensity slowly decreased, the wild swings gradually settling into more typical anomaly patterns. As the readings normalized, her sense of location returned like waking from a dream. The trail markers were suddenly visible again. She'd been standing next to one the entire time. The forest looked familiar once more. She understood now. The magnetic anomalies throughout the Appalachian region created zones where the effect could be triggered, especially in people who were already exhausted, possibly dehydrated, their neural systems stressed from days of physical exertion. The ancient geology of these mountains, formed from tectonic collisions over hundreds of millions of years, layered with magnetic rock formations and fault structures, had created a natural labyrinth of magnetic field distortions. Most hikers passed through without effect, but for some, at certain times, perhaps when multiple factors aligned, the right level of exhaustion, the right magnetic field intensity, the right neurological vulnerability, the effect could be catastrophic. They would walk confidently in the wrong direction, absolutely certain they were going the right way. By the time the disorientation passed, if it passed, they would be lost in terrain that offered no easy return. In dense forest, in mountain hollows, in areas that rescue teams might search multiple times without success because the terrain itself was so difficult and the search areas so vast. Some would survive for days, like Geraldine Largay. Others would fall, become injured, succumb to exposure. A few might wander until they reached areas far from where anyone would think to search. And the disappearances that seemed most mysterious, like young Dennis Martin vanishing behind a bush, could be explained if the child had experienced sudden, complete spatial disorientation. He might have walked confidently away from the area, absolutely certain his family was in the direction he was heading, while searchers combed the area he actually left behind. Part 7. The Truth. Sarah hiked out 2 days later. She filed her report with the National Park Service, forwarding her magnetic field readings and her proposed correlation analysis. She published her findings in a geophysics journal, carefully worded to avoid sensationalism. The response was mixed. Some researchers found the correlation between magnetic anomalies and disappearance clusters intriguing enough to warrant further study. Others dismissed it as coincidence, arguing that correlation didn't prove causation. The Park Service acknowledged receipt of her data but made no official statement. But hikers started paying attention. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy began including information about magnetic anomalies in their safety materials, though carefully couched in general terms about how geology could affect compass readings. They emphasized the importance of GPS devices, of not relying solely on compasses or sense of direction in certain areas. The disappearances didn't stop. They never would, not completely. The Appalachian Mountains stretched over 2,000 miles through some of the most remote and rugged terrain in the eastern United States. Even with perfect navigation equipment, accidents happen. People got hurt, weather turned deadly. But some hikers who experienced sudden, inexplicable disorientation now knew to stop. To sit, to wait, to fight the overwhelming urge to move, to trust that false sense of direction. To radio for help and stay put until rescue arrived. And the number of people who walked into the woods and never came back began, slowly, to decline. Epilogue. The mountains remember. The Appalachian Mountains are older than bones, older than most life on Earth. They were once as tall as the Himalayas, before hundreds of millions of years of erosion wore them down to their current gentle slopes. Deep within them, the scars of ancient tectonic collisions remain, fault lines and magnetic anomalies, zones where the Earth's field twists and turns in ways that defy easy mapping. The Cherokee knew these mountains long before European settlers arrived. Their folklore spoke of places where the boundary between worlds grew thin, where people could walk from one reality into another without meaning to. They spoke of the spirit people who lived in these mountains and sometimes led travelers astray. Perhaps they, too, had noticed the pattern. Perhaps they understood, in their own way, that there were places in these ancient mountains where the world itself could become uncertain, where the very ground beneath your feet might lie about which direction was home. The mountains keep their secrets still. Every year, a handful of people walk into the forest and dawn to come back. Search teams find some eventually. Others remain missing, their fates unknown. The statistics are carefully recorded. Missing 411. The clusters mapped, the patterns analyzed, but stand in certain spots along the trail where the rocks beneath your feet carry the memory of continents colliding, where magnetic north becomes a direction that shifts and swirls, and you might feel it yourself. That moment when the world becomes uncertain, when your internal compass spins, when the forest suddenly looks unfamiliar though you've been walking it for days. That's when you remember, these mountains are older than human understanding. They were shaped by forces that dwarf our brief existence. And sometimes, in the spaces between the rocks, in the magnetic swirls and eddies of ancient geology, the mountains themselves can make you forget which way is home. The key is not to panic, not to trust that sudden certainty about which direction to walk, to sit down, to stay put, to wait for the moment to pass, for the earth to steady itself beneath you, for the trail markers to become visible again. Because in the Appalachian Mountains, sometimes getting lost isn't about taking a wrong turn. Sometimes it is about the earth itself, for just a moment, forgetting to tell you which way is up.
Thank you for watching, guys. See you in next video. Bye bye.